Hold on one second. Okay. Well, welcome to my presentation on virtual exhibits in Alaska. My name is Dylainie. I am the collection specialist at the Palmer Museum of History and Art. I've also worked with the Talkeetna Historical Society and the Museum of Transportation and Industry. I just got my master's degree in museum studies in spring of 2021, I guess, or winter of 2021. So today we're talking about why do virtual exhibits exist, what we're currently doing in Alaska as far as virtual exhibits. We can talk about where do we go from here, what's working, what's not, and then kind of just have a discussion revolved around it. So I have a question. Has anyone heard of an objectless museum before?
No.
No. Okay. So basically, it's a museum without objects. And this has kind of been
Really?
Yes. It's kind of been in the discussion for the past like 20 years. I have a quote here that talks about how museums are now being used as a tool for self-expression, self-recognition, and representation. So now it's more about not necessarily protecting our artifacts, which it still is, but it's more about the visitor experience and what we can teach people. So if you want, you can save my Google presentation. I have some links in here with some really interesting articles about this objectless museum idea and kind of what people have been doing recently. And mostly this has been going on in Europe, not necessarily the United States. Okay, so in my Google Docs, we could type answers of like why virtual exhibits, or we can kind of just talk about it. Like, what is the point of having a virtual exhibit? If anybody has any ideas, just shout them out.
Accessibility.
Accessibility. Okay.
Because we're not open, because there's a pandemic.
Because we're not open because there's a pandemic. Yeah, totally. Anything else?
I would say cost too.
Cost. That is awesome. A really good answer. I didn't even really think about that before. So glad you said that. So we have some different types of virtual exhibits. We have apps, we have web pages, social media, GIS mapping. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. Online collections and AR and VR. I'm gonna try to click these from here and see if they work. Okay, so I have some little YouTube things. Of course, it's gonna have ads, so give it just a second. Okay.
Up, we've got a review on Lavra HD, which is an app that'll take you down history and memory lane.
So I like how he says the Louvre wrong. He says
now this
Lavre.
app's got a collection of 2,300, that's right, 2,300 paintings from the Lavra Museum. And I hope I'm pronouncing Lavra right, but in case I'm not, it is in the title. It's Loubre HD. They've also got a light version if you want to check that one out. But yes, 2,300 paintings. Some of them, or all of them actually, will be in HD. So here I'm categorizing them by century. I can check them out and I'll rate that later. By genre, so here we've got battle genre and cityscape, which is awesome. Let's take a look at that one. And here are all the different paintings. So we'll go into a random one here. I'm not looking. That one looks cool. Well, I don't know. Yes, but all of them are really cool here. It's just really awesome to see and take a look at what history has brought us in terms of the art. And here I can zoom in, and zoom in. That's already good quality, but take a look here. If I hit that HD button, it's going to take a few seconds here. It'll download it in HD, and the quality is just impeccable. It's amazing how it renders so good in the phone. So here you'll be able to see all the smears in the painting, the different crevices or whatnot, and you can really zoom in super detailed into it.
What?
You're going to look at another one here, and you can always hit this little share button at the bottom if you want to save it to your photo album, send the painting by email, publish, and a couple other things there. Now, this app doesn't only have paintings. You can also go into the music here and listen to a few songs. I know most of you know that one. That's like about the only song I know how to play on the piano.
Okay, so you get the gist of the app. But basically, do I have to exit full screen now? Okay, hold on. I might have to reshare my screen. Basically, you could see that app's pretty like dated too. That looked like a iPhone 7 or something. So I'm pretty sure the Louvre's come pretty far as what they're doing now with their apps and virtual exhibits, but it's neat that you can download it, share it, whatever. And then we have things like social media, like the Anchorage Museum's Instagram, I thought was a really great example of how they're utilizing social media. Different pictures throughout town with people, different artists.
Blank screen, sorry.
Oh, is it not working again?
Yeah, it's just blank.
Okay. Thank you for telling me. Okay, can you see it
There.
now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so this is the Anchorage Museum's Instagram. They've got like different guests exploring that sort of thing. I really like the way that Anchorage Museum utilizes social media. Then we have story maps, which this is what I used for my thesis project during college. And they basically build like a website that utilizes different mapping programs alongside interpretive materials. So you can start from scratch or upload research, that sort of thing. And then these are all hosted on their main website, which is accessible to pretty much anybody that has internet access. And then we also have collections management systems that can also serve as a means of virtual exhibits. This is called, if it'll load, maybe it's over here, Catalog It. So they are a cataloging system that was developed, I believe, 5 years ago or so. I know that there's one museum towards Fairbanks that utilizes Catalog It. And you can upload your entire collections to the hub as well, and have all of your entries accessible by the public, and you can pick and choose which ones are and which ones aren't. And so you can search through entire collections this way. And I wish my computer would load, but it's probably my internet access. So that's a downside to the virtual exhibits. But all of this stuff, information's on the Google Slides as well, if you want to look back at that. And then we have AR and VR as well. And this is kind of an example of how they're using virtual reality.
Retrospective here at Tate Modern takes you through the whole range of Modigliani's work. And when we go into the exhibition, we see paintings, we see sculpture, we see drawings by one of the most important artists of the 20th century. And yet, through the virtual reality, we start to get a real sense of environment.
Part of the Modigliani exhibition will be a virtual reality experience where they're recreating Modigliani's studio from 1919.
You get that kind of gut feeling understanding that you don't necessarily get from reading about it or just looking at it in sort of 2D pictures.
Understanding art is about understanding the painter and the paintings and also the kind of historical and social context. And the opportunity we have with virtual reality and for this experience has been to try and deliver that in a very short experience that gets you really closer to those details.
It's amazing how many different departments at Tate it's touched on. So it's been collaboration across the organisation and also with Preloaded and with HTC.
We started with a blank canvas and incrementally we've come to understand and build a picture about Modigliani I don't think people have necessarily seen before.
We really have paid a great attention to historical detail in this experience, whether that's from our researcher in Paris, Vincent Gilles, looking at what a stove should look like at that moment, to our co-curator in Milan, Simonetta Fratelli, looking at new Italian texts and bringing that material in.
Everything you see in the experience, everything that you kind of like interact with, everything that, you know, from the light coming through the whitewashed windows, through to the, you know, the sardine tins, to the colours of the palette, are all completely kind of accurate. The space itself as a studio was never actually visited by anyone alive today.
Working with the BR team has been an incredible experience for me. So I've been very impressed with the way that they can take something that's 100 years old and then recreate it in a 21st century virtual setting.
The thing I enjoyed most was bringing the space to life. There were over 60 objects within the scene, and each model was taken from research and first-hand accounts. The technical research also enabled us to inform the markings on the canvas itself, to be able to inform the brush strokes and how you see that and how the light actually reflects on the surface of the model.
We have done an X-ray of the canvas and the stretcher. We've also looked at it in infrared, and then conservation scientist Joyce Townsend has done analysis of pigments and media to work out exactly what he used.
The Ochre Atelier is an integral part of the exhibition. It does enhance the conclusions that you draw.
The sort of forensic level of historical research that's gone into this can really offer depth and accuracy and bring something else to the table.
This has been something really new for us, and it's been exciting to push those boundaries.
Yeah, so I found that to be extremely interesting, and how we could utilize like Alaskan history and do some sort of VR thing. If only we could do like temperature in that too, and like put them in a room where it's negative 25 degrees or something. So does anybody else have any ideas of different types of virtual exhibits other than kind of what I've outlined?
Does GIS mapping include geolocating stories? So if you have an app that geolocates stories and you walk around town and the museum has created stories about the history of town or something like that?
It does not.
Okay.
So that's a really an interesting. So what is that called?
There are some apps where you can geolocate just audio recordings or music or anything like that. So geolocating actual stories, and it's a different way to do a walking tour. You can also just use an app where people click on the spot. They know where they are and they click on the spot in the map. So it's not so much geolocated as just on a map. You click on demand audio, but that's another option too.
That's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay. So I guess I wanted to ask, what are ways that you are utilizing virtual exhibits at your institution? Or if you're not at all, that's okay too. And you can tell me that we haven't gotten that far yet.
At the American World Eagle Foundation, we haven't done it yet, but for the first time, we're looking at developing a small virtual exhibit about the late salmon runs here in Haines that bring in that congregation of bald eagles that we host our festival around, and launching it for the festival.
Cool. So would that be like a web page sort of thing, or would it look like a?
This year it'd probably be more of a web page, but it'd be interesting for next year to do more of that geolocation.
For sure.
I think that GIS mapping one that you showed, Dylainie, would be really cool for future of that exhibit. If you can show where the salmon are coming from as someone scrolls down, like as the salmon come in and the eagles come in, that would be really cool.
There is, I noticed I was looking through the GIS stuff, one that Alaska has done already, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, which is pretty neat, and it's about migratory bird research. So I have the link to this in the slides too, so you can take your time and kind of check out the way that they've used this system. It's also has sound incorporated as well. I think it's bird noises is my guess. but really neat stuff that they got going on there. Okay. So I wanted to talk about what Alaska has been doing already. And so I was gonna split you guys up into groups, but there's not that many people here today. So we'll just kind of go through, and I chose a couple different places that have some virtual things going on their website. So the first one is Juneau. And it looked like their virtual exhibits were very basic, kind of just like super basic website with information about the collection. I wasn't really getting a lot from this. And then you can search. So if we search, like, I'm trying to think of a really basic term, wildlife, it pops up in another window, and then there's nothing matching. So there's no list of like searchable subjects or things like that. It's very confusing, and I understand this is probably super old from like 2007, but an update would be nice to have on the website, because this is still active on their page. And I'll go over Palmer at the end because that's me. But Sitka's online exhibits, let's take a look. It's also very basic. So a lot goes on into the planning. Okay, click here to learn more. So I think this is more of like a walkabout thing. It's also very confusing and not easy to navigate, which I've found this issue in a lot of museums. And all this stuff was probably done over a decade ago, and there just hasn't been any sort of update. And maybe they have something going on, but there's no like update to the public like, hey, we're working on this. And I don't know if that's just to say, like, you don't want to make a promise you can't keep. And so if it doesn't get fulfilled, you don't want to, yeah. And then the last one was the Museum of the North, which I've heard really great things. I haven't been here yet, but I've heard really good things. So they have online exhibits, videos and podcasts, which are a form of virtual exhibits, and lesson plans. So let's look and see. So they've got a list of like their social media, virtual tour, audio guides. So that's pretty easy to navigate. Let's look at, I don't know, does anybody have a choice of which one we should look at? Any thoughts?
Earthquakes.
Earthquakes. Okay. Very fond of the earthquake. Okay. So it's just some facts, a photographic tour, newspaper archive, immersive exhibit. Let's click on immersive. So it's a a YouTube video, probably. Let's watch it. And he's our exhibit guide. I like him. Very intense music.
Last flight for the day due to the quake.
November 2002. I was on my back under the main support girder of.
So it almost looks like this is like a video game that you can download, is what it feels like to me. Does anybody else get that feeling?
That's what I was thinking.
Which I kind of want to download it, but I don't know how long that's going to take. So if you have the time, I suggest going back to this webpage and downloading. But it is kind of interesting that engages the viewer like a video game. So I'm thinking 12-year-olds are like the hardest to engage in anything. And this might be like interesting. And you could also take this into that VR, AR realm, and sort of adapt it that way, which is pretty cool. Huh.
Yeah,
This
it looks like
actually-
they redid the exhibit in CAD and then you just are able to deal with the interactive so as if you were there, which is pretty cool. Like if you
Yeah.
can't go to the museum, you're basically in the museum this way.
It is. It's very neat. And you can, it says you can collect badges. That's probably very, kids like to do that sort of scavenger hunt. I've collected them all. Okay. And then the last one was with my museum, the Palmer Museum. We have a historical photo project that we've been working on, and the website is slowly coming together. We currently have a computer upstairs for people to access the photo collection as well, which we found that nobody wants to sit down and click on anything, and they get kind of like scared about touching the computer. So we got to work on that. So basically we have a website set up where you can search anything like, I don't know, horse, and then it'll pop up with all the photos that we have of horses, that sort of thing, and their own collections. And so we've been trying to find ways to like make this a better experience. And we're working on trying to do workshops with the photo collection and actually get people looking at the website. But there's definitely some improvements that could be done.
What's on the back end?
I know that so I'm not in charge of the photo project itself. It's my coworker, Richard. But they've been working with someone that's like developing the website. So it's nothing that I've heard of before. But this is similar to like how Catalog It works, where it just uploads the collection, but I can find out what it's called and then send that to you and disperse, or I can stick it on that Google Doc slide.
Okay.
Okay.
So with your photo project though, is the idea to ask the community to help you fill in details about the photos?
Yes. So most of our photos have been donated, and then we scan them and give them back to the donor if they want them. And we do work with them hand in hand to figure out who's in the photos. But I know that Richard does a lot of work on his own at kind of filling in the pieces. So currently there's one photograph that he was looking at, and it's a twin boys in tutus next to a truck, and it's super cute. And the donor has no idea who these boys are, like nobody knows. So there might be some sort of outreach projects that we do in the future with the community. For now, the only project that we have going is I started a cyanotype workshop where they look at our photo collection and then choose the photos they want. And then I teach them the cyanotype photo printing process. But that's at least getting the community to look at the website, because that's kind of the issue that we're having, is not that many people are actually engaged and looking. So outreach is a huge thing that we need to work on for sure.
Yeah, cool.
So my next slide was kind of what's working in all of these virtual exhibits and what we can do to make it better. If we want to talk about that, we can. If there's anything that we think that we could do in our institutions to make our websites better or our virtual exhibits. If anybody has any thoughts?
I think that's something that a lot of museums forget, and we saw this when you were going through the sites, is that technology is changing all the time, and you have to have a budget to update. I know that a lot of museums like to, at least when apps were first popular, they wanted to do apps. But of course, every single year, even twice a year, 3 times a year, apps would have to be updated to match the new operating system of the phones. And a lot of museums didn't think about the budget of that. So it's the same thing with website, online exhibits, is there's always new things, and your exhibit will start to look old, and you need to have a plan to either say this is an exhibit from this era and we wanted to keep it to show you what that would look like, or decide to update it and have that budget in your mind when you're creating it.
Definitely. And I know a lot of issues that smaller museums have is they don't even have near enough that budget to handle a project like that. So.
Well, I think you have to talk about staff fluctuations too. Like my predecessor really started on TikTok right before she left. But, you know, when she was exploring it, she was just popping things up as it came to her head. And then we never had a social media plan for TikTok. And that same kind of thing of like, you know, your control documents, you need to review every so often. Like I feel like our social media plans, we need to review every so often. And I don't feel like we all think about that. Like Dixie was saying, we don't think about how often we need to do those things, because it's unfortunately not every 3 to 5 years. It's every 6 months to a year.
Yeah, technology is so fast.
It would be ideal to have one person dedicated to the social media or updating, you know, the app or the website, but it's usually multiple hands on one project.
Or one person doing like 1,000 different things, and that's just one of the million things they have to do.
Right.
Yeah. So what can we do to make it better? Get better funding for museums so we can have a perfect number of people.
Yeah, I think, you know, engaging graduate programs and having someone work on a project might be beneficial. Then you have that one person working towards something, but then you run into that problem of like, once they're gone, then, you know, who fixes the problem? I don't know.
Well, and the continual problem of having rotating staff. And not that that's a bad thing per se with the graduate students and them gaining experience doing social media and website development, but you're constantly getting new ideas then.
Right.
And so
yeah,
the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, having someone come in who's maybe younger and has more tech savvy, and then they leave, and then what do you do if something,
Right.
or you don't understand how they put it together, you don't know how to work the back end. So yeah, that's also a difficult thing.
Any other thoughts?
I think something that's working, I really like just the very simple thing of putting your collections online. I think that's something that a lot of museums can move towards, because a lot of collections management systems have that capability. So that's something that's exciting, that's working. I think that's a pretty easy thing for people to try to do. And then social media, right? So maybe choosing one thing in an exhibit while the exhibit is on, just say, I'm going to show one thing every few days, or even once a week, depending on how much staff is available. That's something that's maybe doable as well.
Right. Definitely. I know I think we might switch over to catalog it and try to get most of this collection online, just because the majority of it is scannable and easy to put on the interwebs for people to access. So we'll see how that goes, and I will update you guys.
Something I thought was exciting from, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just learned about that UAM, the University of Alaska Museum of the North. They actually put all of their records online too, on their in their database, so that when they're searching for someone, that person gets every information about that object that they have, so that if that person would like to update anything or says, actually, I don't think that's correct, then they have that ability to have that interaction with people as well. And I think that's really wonderful. It's very open. It's very cooperative with, I don't know if cooperative is the right word. My words are gone, but like working with the people who are interested in your collection to make sure that everything is accurate. So I think that's nice too.
Yeah.
And now we'll stop. Go ahead, Dylainie.
No. I was just going to see if anybody else had any last minute ideas or thoughts about their institution, or, you know, in a dream world, what would you like to do with your museum as far as virtual endeavors? Unlimited funding.
Well, I was thinking, Dylainie, a lot about the difference, if there is a difference between a virtual exhibit and having collections virtual, because I think there's quite a distinction between the two, and the angle of approach is pretty distinct because they're similar in that they're promoting access to the museum, but they're also different because one is more curated and trying to tell a story, where the other is more representing the whole collection. And I was just wondering, what your thoughts are on versus a virtual exhibit versus virtual collections.
I definitely think that I feel like they can be intertwined, right? You could have like a virtual collection that just says, this is the object number, this is what it is, and then like no other information, and just like, but if you have information on that, so say it's like a photograph, right? And it's a man, his name's John, and his dog Buddy, and then there's like a building in the back. And if you have all of those things like marked or hashtagged so you can make it searchable, I think in that way, with detail about the photo as well, it kind of turns into an exhibit. Because if there's information about who's in there, what's going on, and then there's ways to like search and look for things rather than just like, this is it and that's it, like it's just this photo with this thing, then it can kind of turn into an exhibit. But I guess, there is two very different, like you could do a full-on exhibit like that video game that we saw, that's totally different than the collection. But you could have that video game with the collections aspect involved in it. So you could be in a virtual reality and turn over and look at a computer, and that's, the collection viewable in virtual reality. So I think they're meshed together pretty closely. Trying to think of what else, but they could be also very separate, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm being very general, but
I agree, and I love the the virtual aspect, the possibilities it opens up. It's just kind of that. I think what we all suffer from is like people actually going online,
right?
The content online,
right? Which I think that just comes down to outreach and getting connected with schools and people that are homeschooling and teaching from home, and somehow getting this information out to them. And it's really about us doing that rather than just posting it online and being like, well, there you go, my job's done, it's online. But it's like, we really need to work on reaching out to the community. And even if that's just going back to plain old paper and mailing, which, is arguably like a good thing and a bad thing, because we don't want to waste paper, but at the same time, it's a great way to reach out to people, to have a physical thing in their hand, and to make that a really personal experience for them, whether it's like a letter or something like that, that really reaches and touches the community. That could be something, or having staff going to schools and presenting on these virtual projects, really working with the teachers one-on-one. Yeah, that aspect of it needs to get done too, which is a lot of work on top of already building a virtual or online database. So
Yeah, I really like just like the earthquake exhibit at UAF is having that kind of dual. So you can, you can then serve both audiences. You can serve the audience who wants to be on site, but then with the online aspect, you can just have another dimension. And I'm sure curators would love to put in all that peripheral information they couldn't get into label text, online. And so if you're, super passionate about earthquakes, you can go online and then experience another level of the exhibition. It's not always possible on site, which I think is really cool. Twice as much work, right? Because you're basically doing two exhibitions, really in that case. But it's great when they, can really coincide, and you can have, both layers.
Sure. Hopefully, we can all get the funding to do something like that in the future. That would be nice.